Hey QBurgh, Nebby Nick here, and this is the QBurgh Podcast. Let's get Nebby. Joining me today is my friend, a filmmaker, and a journalist, Hansen Bursic. Hansen, thank you for being here.
Of course.
And you're here after a week of events for Backyard Docs.
Yeah.
We have the Real Q Film Festival coming up.
Yes.
There's so much happening in the Pittsburgh film scene. What do people here in Western Pennsylvania in the region need to know about the film scene here and getting engaged with all of the variations of films and festivals that they can attend?
Oh my God, it's such a great time to be a film lover in Pittsburgh. You know, I think Real Q turns 40 this year, which is crazy to think about. It's the longest continuously running film festival in Pittsburgh. So obviously with, I think, some of the Film Pittsburgh Three Rivers and some of their festivals, they've been running for longer, but they've taken breaks. So Real Q is the longest running continuous film festival in Pittsburgh. I mean, that's crazy. And it's a queer film festival. It's also, I think, the fourth. You're going to have to fact check me on this, but it's like the fourth, I think it's the fourth oldest or the fifth oldest LGBT film festival in the world.
No way.
And that's here in Pittsburgh. And they bring so many good films. Of course, Backyard Docs is now in its fifth year, which also feels very landmark in its own way. We've been doing a really fantastic job of bringing some queer films within that as well. Our opening and closing night focused a lot on the LGBT community, and then we also had some fantastic short films, including ones that were set in Pennsylvania with the Amish Country Queer, which is exactly what it sounds like.
It was a great film.
Yeah, it's so much fun. I don't know. I love it. I think in Pittsburgh, it's easy to be like, oh, we're not film focused, or big productions come here and they make films and then they leave. But there's just so much richness of storytelling here, and there's so many fantastic filmmakers who live here. It's a really fantastic time to be queer in Pittsburgh and love movies.
Yeah. And so you're a filmmaker, you're a journalist, but you're also the festival director for Backyard Docs, and you work at a lot of festivals. You travel and attend a ton of festivals across the country, across the world. What is something that people don't realize when you're creating a festival? I'm sure you're watching a lot of films.
Oh my God, so many films. I mean, it's kind of the best and worst part about it, because you're watching so many films that sort of, I don't watch as many films for fun anymore, but they're all amazing. So I'm watching fantastic films. I have friends of mine who are like, do you want to go out and see a movie? And I'm like, I just watched 3 documentaries today. I cannot go see a movie.
I feel that, very social environment. My social battery is depleted by the end of the day. Having fun for me is like going home, reading a book, and shutting out the world.
Yeah. I think for me it's similar, but with documentary. But when I watch too many documentaries, I have to go back to my comfort show. So I'm watching a sitcom or like some stupid cartoon. But I think what people don't realize, to answer your question, is just how much time and energy goes into it. I mean, we will review so many films. I think Real Q in particular, because I also program for Real Q, we're hundreds and hundreds of films that we have to sift through, and our team, most of us volunteers, we go through meticulously and pick these films. So they really are the films that stand out. And what I do, and I like to do, is obviously I go to these film festivals all across the country, sometimes the world. And I really pick out films that I feel like the Pittsburgh audience in particular will resonate with. And what's great about that is there are so many fantastic films that I just feel like Pittsburgh audiences would just love, and they just don't know it yet. And that's the great thing about Real Q and Backyard Docs. You're seeing films that are by independent filmmakers. It will probably not screen here in theaters ever. And so this is the only time that you'll be able to see these fantastic films on the big screen, beyond maybe seeing them online. And even then, that's not a definite. So, it really is like a chance, to see something new and to see something that you'll never see anywhere else.
I'm sure you get asked this question a lot, but what makes a great film? What are you looking for when you're selecting pieces to be screened?
Gosh, so many things. I mean, I think about the subject matter, or either those actors, or in my case with documentary, what's the story? Who are the stars of the film? Who are they in conversation with, and like kind of how are they in conversation with this moment? We really, especially at Backyard Docs, really intentionally try to program films that meet this moment. So it's not just let's program films because they're amazing. They're all amazing. There's so many films that are amazing, but it's also how can they be in conversation with some of the things that here in Pittsburgh that we are dealing with, or America at large, how are we dealing with it? So obviously with some of our queer topics and our queer films at Backyard Docs, it's like, how are they engaging with some of these things that we're dealing with here in Pittsburgh? How are they engaging with, what it means to be queer in a rural environment, what it means to be transgender in America today? Those are the films that I'm looking for that kind of broaden our cultural and societal understanding of some of these issues, and brings humanity to them, because I think it's so easy with headlines and in traditional news to be caught up in like the facts and figures and the legislation and the numbers. But when you see people living their lives authentically and you get to live with them for even if it's a short, like somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes, or for a feature, for an hour or two, it really does kind of break down those barriers and broadens understanding of a community that you might not have access to, or you might never have had access to. For a lot of people, the movies are the first time that you're meeting trans people, and I think that that's really powerful. And that's still the case. I mean, trans people are such a small portion of our population. They take up a lot of airtime on the news. You hear about trans people all the time, most of the time from not trans people. And to get to see and live with those folks for an hour or two, I think it can be really transformative. And I think it really speaks to the power of cinema to really, allow for space to empathize, but to just see the humanity in one another.
And talking about that empathy, that humanity, your art that you're creating focuses on queer and particularly trans stories in these rural areas. And I think a lot of people may think that that's tied to one particular viewpoint, one political angle. But as we were talking a little bit before this, it's just simply not the case. Not to say that there isn't issues, but there are queer and trans individuals that are living in areas like the ones that are featured in your work and a lot of other people's, where they are thriving, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think people are surprised. I think it's so easy to get like in this, headspace that being queer and trans is a bad thing, whether you think it's a bad thing because you disagree with our lifestyle, which I think is ridiculous, or it's a bad thing because you just think, there's so many negatives. It sounds like we would be, struggling all the time. And there is struggle, of course, but everywhere in every part of the country and all over the world, queer and trans people find ways to thrive. And I think that that's the incredible thing about our community and other communities that fall into that historically excluded category. We persist. Like we're not going away. And, wherever we are in the world, we're finding community. Whether it's the film I was talking about, Amish Country Queer, where, you see queer folks in Lancaster County, out there thriving and finding community and, building spaces to party and to celebrate and to meet each other and find love. Or it's some of the work that I'm doing around, trans people in the South. It's like so easy to be like, wow, the South must suck for trans people. I think it's easy to think that. And I sort of thought it going into it as well. But, what I've learned is like, just like anywhere else, it's like cutting out the bullshit, going forward and living their lives authentically, you find love and you find happiness and you find things that are fulfilling. You find your passions. And that is something that, the queer and trans community is like good at doing. We're good at finding happiness, amongst, the myriad of political attacks and demagogues. We are good at, persisting. I mean, even if you look back at, the 80s, and, the AIDS epidemic, it was you went to work, and then you went and you mourned the dead. We mourned and we celebrated and honored the people who we lost. And then we were partying very intensely at night. The partying never stopped, and I think that that's important because we need to live. The moment that we stop partying, we stop doing community activities, we start gathering. The moment that we stop doing those things, in whatever form that is, online, in person, doesn't matter. The moment that we stop doing that, we're not living anymore. And, the queer community has a very, I think that's one of the most inspiring things about the queer community, whether you're a member or not, is that like we persist and we find the party regardless. We are the cultural touchstones. Society sort of emulates what we're doing, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, here in Pittsburgh, Pride for us, we're really trying to push. It's year round. It's a year round celebration. But something that we were talking about earlier, focusing on the queer community, I feel like right now, sexuality is more accepted, right, than that was back in the day. But as we've talked about, you're seeing a lot of the issues that queer individuals had back in the day is now translating to our trans friends. And I don't know if you could sort of speak to this political moment that we're in. And I feel like sometimes the media in general sensationalizes things and dramatizes things. But yeah, I mean, just your thoughts on that, because it's such a crucial point in a lot of your storytelling.
Yeah. I mean, the media is always going to be 2 steps behind, We are good at some things, the media, and we're bad at, and others. And I think, when it comes to things like this, we are steps behind. Our newsrooms and our media, our especially national news and also hyper-local news in particular, are just really struggling with the trans, topic, and trans people and how to frame these issues. And, you look at things like the New York Times. There's a great documentary, not to shout it out, but that's a part of Real Q coming up, but also is probably going to be available online soon, maybe by the time this podcast comes out, called Heightened Scrutiny. It's Sam Federer's new film, who also did Disclosure, which is another great film about trans representation in Hollywood you can watch on Netflix. But what his film really does, Heightened Scrutiny, is really talks about journalism and how journalists have sort of fueled this wave of anti-trans court cases, because you see the Supreme Court for the first time in kind of a very historic move referencing thought pieces that were on the New York Times. And historically, the Supreme Court hasn't done that. They don't, they don't reference journalism in that way, especially opinion pieces or pieces that, are by individual journalists. They took those and they referenced them, and that's why, in part, that we're in the situation we are now. We have to be very careful as journalists to be super mindful of how our reporting affects others. And I think when we look at how media engages with trans people, very rarely do we see journalism and journalistic news outlets media outlets in general actually end up like interviewing trans people. Oftentimes what happens is they'll interview think tanks and they'll interview, advocacy groups. Sometimes a trans person will be representative of that advocacy group, maybe the ACLU or some of these, or GLAAD. They'll come out and they'll bring out somebody who works there who is trans, and so you might hear a trans perspective that way. But very rarely do we actually see trans people engaged in this way. We were following, as I live between LA and Pittsburgh, we were following some of the anti-trans school board stuff that was coming through in Southern California. And what I was alarmed by was so many of the pieces, the publications that were following this were not interviewing any trans youth. They were just interviewing school board members and concerned parents. And there were some really fantastic pieces that came out that ended up, and I think the best pieces really rounded it out with a really strong perspective of these young trans people. I think we just need to kind of recenter ourselves. We're talking about young people. We should be talking to young people, I think that is, like, it seems obvious, but I think, and this is for society at large, we're too often leaving out younger voices, and we're too often kind of letting these old institutions and these older, voices speak for young people across the board. And that's not just trans issues. And I think the media that I'm hungry for and the media that I'm seeing that does a really good job of breaking this down and showing how it really is interviewing young people, is showing young people now. Because it's different. Young people today are like way different than even when I grew up. And I'm not old by any stretch.
No, we're not. Not at all.
No, but I hate to admit this on air, but I'm pushing 30, right? So, which most people would not consider old by any stretch.
Not at all.
But the people who are coming of age now, they've lived their lives almost entirely within the Trump administration, a very specific worldview and a very specific environment to grow up in. They've grown up completely in the social media age. They've had their lives from a very young age online. They've been consuming media almost exclusively outside of news, traditional news. And, influencers and talking heads on TikTok and, on Instagram Reels, those are the people that they're listening to and talking to and engaging with. It's a very different environment to grow up in. They're consuming media differently than older generations. It's just different. It's totally different. Their perspectives are completely disengaged from what's getting shown on, Fox, CNN. And so we need to be spending a considerable amount of time talking to young people to understand how young people are thinking right now. And again, that's especially true for trans community. Young people get it. Young people understand that trans rights are human rights at large. There's still a lot of work to do. There's definitely people on every age demographic who I think have growth to do and need to see trans stories. But it's this older generation that's really leading the charge and that are really upset about this. And I think all it takes is talking to a young person about this to understand what direction we're going, which I think is hopeful. Yeah. But also to understand why, what the priorities are of young people and what work needs to be done in those spaces, because there's lots of issues for young people. And I hedge to say that trans rights for young people is definitely an issue they care about, but it's not like there's not a huge debate happening there. Sure. Young people are more concerned about, the job market going into this complicated moment. They're more concerned with, how AI is going to affect their education. They're concerned with, how, the government is going to censor, the things that they care about. They're concerned with democracy, So it's a little bit different. And I think we just need to listen to more young people.
Looking for a home improvement contractor? Look no further than today's sponsor, Brianna's Mobile Workshop, Pittsburgh's premier queer contractors. They're all about bringing their safe space to yours, one project at a time. What do? Well, pretty much everything. If you have a project, they have the skills. They tackle kitchen and bathroom remodels. They're also experts in things like doors and awnings, retaining walls, French drains, hardwood floors, and even building additions and decks. Seriously, the list goes on and on and on. Whether you need help with a home project or commercial, they will handle it all, interior and exterior. They'll come to you anywhere in Allegheny and surrounding counties. Ready to get that project off the to-do list? Scan the QR code or tap the link in the description for a consultation. Stop dreaming about a better space and start building one. Thank you to Brianna's Mobile Workshop for being the sponsor of today's episode. Now, back to the show.
And so much of the films that you have worked on and that you're currently working on do speak to younger queer and trans individuals. And you have this awesome new project that you start shooting in December?
Yes.
So the Trans Trucker Project, tell us about it.
Oh my gosh. So the Trans Trucker Project, after my last film, it was a film about these legendary parties that used to take place in New Hope, Pennsylvania, where hundreds of trans women used to take over this small town and throw these raucous parties. And that's about how the town changed, and they changed over time with these parties. It was a really fantastic film to work on, and it was very joyous. It's something I think we all kind of need a little bit of joyful trans history right now, which there is many examples of. And this woman came up to me, and she said, I loved your film. Have you ever considered making a documentary on trans truck drivers? And I was like, no, I have not considered making a documentary on trans truck drivers. Yeah. But tell me more. And, we became friends. We started talking over the phone. She recommended this great book to me called Semi-Queer by Ann Bailey, which is a great name for a book. And it was all about queer and trans truck drivers. And she was quoted in an article saying that she believes that as much as 3% of all truck drivers in the U.S. are trans women. Just trans women, not anyone else. And that's like 90,000 truck drivers. Like, it is an obscenely large amount of truckers in the U.S. And it's so disproportionate to the rest of like these working class industries where they do this data. It's very limited data, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But I was floored. I was completely stunned by that statistic, and I started talking to these amazing trans truckers. And what I realized was there's a lot of older trans truck drivers who have been doing this for a very long time, and there's a ton of really young trans drivers who have been just started in this industry. And that was what surprised me. And so we met Ashley, the lead of the film, earlier this year, and she's 24 years old. She's a third generation truck driver. Her dad was a trucker and her grandfather was a truck driver. She never thought when she came out as trans that she fit into trucking. And then she got involved with the LGBTQ Trucking Network, which is a real organization.
That exists?
It's a real organization.
Love that.
They do like truck shows and they have a podcast.
We'll have to link to it.
They're so good. They're so good. And she got hooked up with this organization, and she saw herself in trucking for the first time. And this organization and the people in that organization were actually the ones that helped her get her trucking license so that she could go and truck drive. And so she's been trucking for about a year now, and she loves it. She's obsessed with it. Like, she's really passionate about it. It's like she feels like she found her calling. And to see a young trans person who grew up in a small town, who didn't see themselves fit in much of anywhere, find a place in an industry that America knows very well and it very much associates with this old school red-blooded American, mostly white, mostly male, like we have that, expectation that,
Yes.
that's what we're going to see. For this person to find their passion in trucking, I think is like super liberating and reminds us that like working class industries are changing. It's not one kind of person that's out there. And, if you look at, and this is the last point, but if you look at these attack ads that they ran during the last political cycle in places like Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I've seen them on the television.
There's this comparison that they draw. We noticed we see the same thing every year from anti-trans groups that are like, oh well, they're coming into the bathrooms and blah blah blah. I mean, we've seen that before. It's an old scare tactic. They used to use it for gay people. Oh, the gays, they're gonna come into your locker rooms and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So we've heard it for a long time. We've dealt with that narrative. It's a classic, right? That it works. It's unfortunate. It works. We've been trying to destroy that narrative for a long time. It's untrue. But what we saw for the first time that was really interesting this year was a lot of these anti-trans groups and hyper right-wing extremist groups were pushing the narrative that candidates, liberal-leaning candidates, care more about trans people than working class Americans. They care more about pronouns than factory workers. Like that was the narrative we were seeing. And it was so alarming when I was working on this film to see that narrative, because it was like, oh crap. It's like we as Hollywood have done such a horrible job of, and I say we as Hollywood, I'm not Hollywood, but like we as media,
yes.
You're
in LA.
Land.
Yeah, you're over there.
Something like that. I guess.
Aren't we all Hollywood? Yes.
I don't know. Something like that. But like we as a media culture, we as creators, we as an industry, have done such a horrible job of showing working class queer and trans stories. I asked a friend of mine, I was like, when's the last time you saw a working class trans person? And not, an artist, an activist, or in many cases a sex worker, which all those narratives are very important. But when was the last time you saw, a trans person that was, doing a factory job? When was the last time you saw a trans person do, was an ambulance driver or, a, store clerk or a, these jobs that many trans Americans have.
Yeah, never.
Or a truck driver, right?
Yeah, right.
And so what we really wanted to do with this film, we want to fill a critical gap. If the average person who works at a working class job doesn't see trans people working in industries that they're working in, then there's the empathy is not going to be there. They're not going to see the connection. If they see a trans truck driver and you're a truck driver and you have maybe some expectations on how trans people are, and you see these people who act like you, talk like you, have the same, interests, have the same, struggles with, work and getting paid and the industry that you work in, you empathize and you realize that we're not all so different. We need those narratives. We need working class trans stories. And that's really one of the big reasons that guided this story, beyond us just being deeply engaged with Ashley's story and thinking she's like the best person ever. Like we're in love with her. She's amazing. But beyond that, it was how can we do better as an industry? Like we need these stories so bad right now. Yeah, and
you touch on the industry, right? Covering queer and trans stories, I think, in today's political climate, but in general, can be a challenge when it comes to funding, right? Making films, it's not free, and I know that you talked about this extensively, but what's it looking like now, today, trying to fund your film or fund similar pieces of art?
That's really tough. We have the best team in terms on paper that I've ever had for a film ever. I only work with incredible people, but this team that I've assembled now is one of the most like prestigious and well-regarded teams that I've ever worked with. One of our producers is a Sundance award-winning producer who their last film was Oscar shortlisted. I have a cinematographer who worked on, a director of photography and a cinematographer who worked on American Factory, which won an Oscar several years ago. My composer just won a Grammy. Like, I have this team that, like, and by anybody who looked at, like, us on paper was like, oh, crap, like, this is, like, a world-class team. And yet, we were getting locked out of all of these grants, all of these opportunities. We were pitching the film over and over again. And what we were saying, what we were hearing back feedback wise, we were asking for feedback, like, why didn't we get this grant? Why didn't we get this? Why didn't we get that? And the majority of what people were saying was, this is an insanely great film. We can't support this right now, either because there's too many people applying for funding because we got federal grants getting cut and arts institutions are shuttering, or because our organization or foundation isn't supporting trans stories right now. We're afraid to support trans stories right now. And that's the world we live in. You know, that's our media landscape. And we were sitting there, you know, about a year and a half in, we hadn't gotten a single pledged dollar for our film. My producers, you know, hadn't been in a situation like this in a while, and being like, you know, looking at ourselves and being like, is it our story? Like, is it our pitch documents? Are we not doing this right? Are we not talking about it the right way? Because all the feedback was, this is a great film, not right now, you know, and we were just like, but we need to finish this film right now. Like, this is the moment. And so we're all queer and trans people on our team. And so we sat there and we were like, okay, you know, this is one of those moments where we have to go back to our roots. And so we have been fundraising for this film by literally going from city to city across the country and like throwing parties, like dance parties, like raves. And that's how we've been raising money for our film. We've been going to different cities like Los Angeles and New York, but also Durham and Miami and, you know, and Pittsburgh, and finding community and explaining to them why this is important, what we're looking for, why we're in this situation that we're in. And you know what? They get it. They get it. They absolutely get it. They're like, yeah, that makes sense to me. Here's my money. And, you know, and they're out here and they get to party. And it's been so freeing to not have to rely on these gatekeepers in the industry that are fickle and that are like have their hands tied by a very scared, very wealthy class of people within the nonprofit and philanthropy world, and instead be able to, you know, make a film that starts and ends with the LGBT community. It's liberating, and we've been really excited by it. Now, films are very expensive, so we will take any foundation money, and we are working to call the powers that be so that we can, you know, can get them. But a majority of what we've raised for our film has been from you, have been from me, have been from people like us, you know, queer and trans people just living our lives. And that community built model, I think, is one that I'm really excited to talk about, because our community is so special in that we support each other. We build each other up. We give to causes, you know, queer causes and trans causes, because we care about this work. And I think if you're looking for hope right now in a very bleak media landscape, that's it. And that's what I've been telling every filmmaker I know who's working on trans films. They're all in the same boat. They're like, there's not enough money. It's tough out here. I'm like, screw the industry, screw the grants, screw the studios, screw the foundations. Like, they don't get it. We do. We get it. And so go out to your local gay bar and explain the situation and say, hey, can I have some space to throw a party, and throw that damn party. You know, like get DJs and drag queens and people to come out and have a big party and raise some money. I promise that's going to be easier than dealing with the powers that be. And get that film made, because we need these films now. Like, don't tell them to like wait till tomorrow, till next year. Funding systems are going to get better. We just wait. We have to get through this moment. No, do it now. Do it now. Make that film happen, and do it by any means necessary. You know, and for us, that meant raves.
Well, how can people learn more about the Trans Trucker Project and donate?
Yeah, so we have a website, I believe transtruckerproject.com, that will send you directly to our page, which has a bunch of resources. We are having an online fundraiser, and at any point you can donate. And so that's one way to support us. Also, just be on the lookout for parties. And, you know, the thing is if you're listening to this, and I know this is mostly a Pittsburgh audience, but we'll take that. You know, we'll take another Pittsburgh party. But, you know, we've been asking folks, if you are passionate about this, you can throw a party for us. You know, like if you're passionate about this, hey, like I know of a place, you know, I have a community, you know, can we throw a little party here? Yes, absolutely. You know, if your event or organization or bar or cafe or whatever has like a charity night and you give to a charity, like let us be that charity. We are fiscally sponsored. It is still a tax write-off, you know, like donate and, you know, have a little event for us. These little events actually make a huge difference. So whether it's you personally, you donating, or you want to throw us a little event, I think those are the two biggest ways you can support us. And then, of course, follow us. My production company has an Instagram.
Yeah, congrats on that, by the way.
Thank you. Yes. We're Pittsburgh-based. It's a Pittsburgh-based production company. It's called Hansen Bursic Film. And it's really focused on this, you know, queer and trans stories and working class stories. So
great. Well, how can people follow you, keep in touch with your work moving forward?
Yeah, so we have an Instagram at Hansen Bursic Film. That's for my production company. You can also follow me on Instagram. It's at Hansen Bursic. So those are on Instagram. But I also have a Facebook. I'm going to be honest, I don't really use it all that much.
Same.
But I also have a website and I have a newsletter, and you can sign up for my newsletter on our website. So
great. Well, Hansen, I appreciate it. Thank you for the hope for queer and trans stories. We'll have to have you back on after you create this film. I'm looking forward to it, and I can't wait to get my camo trans trucker hat.
Yes. Oh my God. Get your hat.
Well, thanks, Hansen. I appreciate it. And thank you all for listening and for watching. Make sure you follow us at QBurgh and at QBurgh Mag, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch this conversation. And we'll be nebbing around with you next time. Bye, guys.